A surge of violet radiance cascaded down the domed chamber, catching the facets of crystal pillars that ringed the great Senate of the Galactic Council. The air itself seemed to vibrate, charged with ceremony, expectation, and a sharp undertone of dread. At the center dais, elevated above the 1,000 seats of representatives, a tall figure rose. His frame gleamed like a sculpture of obsidian forged in fire. Scales overlapped like armor, catching the light in deep purples and blacks. When he moved, the subtle shift of gill slits along his neck whispered like blades being drawn. Primarch Varys Dalar of the Korith Dominion extended a hand with 6 slender, talon-tipped fingers and pressed it against the crystalline console that magnified his voice to every corner of the chamber. His posture was immaculate, shoulders squared, chin raised, a performance as much as a declaration. When he spoke, his words reverberated with an arrogance that clung like smoke. By mandate of the Galactic Council, under authority vested in this body by the Conquered of Stars, we enact today the Decree 9A. Effective immediately, the species known as Homo sapiens is forbidden access to quantum slipstream transit. For a duration of 1,000 standard cycles, Earth and its colonies are confined to sublight travel. The words fell like hammer strikes. He paused, deliberately letting the decree echo, his gaze sweeping the amphitheater with the slow relish of a predator circling prey. This council acts, not out of vengeance, but out of duty to preserve balance. Humanity has revealed itself volatile, chaotic, prone to aggression beyond proportion. Their brief era among the stars has been marred by recklessness and defiance. To safeguard the stability of our civilizations, this precaution is required. So it has been spoken. So it shall be. The declaration detonated in the chamber like an explosion of sound. Delegates erupted in applause, some with subtle grace, others with brutish fervor. The spindly Sarathi, their glassy limbs trembling like reed stalks, struck their elongated hands together in shrill cadence. The massive Vakor, armored in organic plates, slammed fists against their thoraxes, each impact resonating like a war drum. Even the Illumari, translucent beings whose glowing circulatory webs cast auroras through their gelatinous forms, pulsed their bodies in synchronized waves of approval. On worlds scattered across millions of systems, the decree unfurled in real time. Broadcast nodes magnified Dalar's towering figure across cities and colonies. 1,000 years blazed across the projection. In the docking rings of Miris Station, merchants let out sighs of relief, their voices blending with the static roar of neon signs flashing stability ensured. Even on the cold plains of Sindrak IV, soldiers pounded their weapons against the ground in rhythmic satisfaction. The humiliation was deliberate, orchestrated to be not only a sentence, but a spectacle. Yet in one shadowed alcove of the chamber, 2 men stood motionless. Ambassador Richard Halden, dressed in the austere uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, clenched the railing so tightly the tendons of his hand protruded like steel cords. His face was a mask of forced calm, but beneath the surface a tremor betrayed him, the brief twitch of a cheekbone too rigidly held. Beside him, Defense Attaché Marcus Rael kept his eyes locked downward, lips sealed in a line so tight it seemed pain itself held it shut. Neither spoke, for silence was all that remained. They knew their protests would carry no weight. Their stillness was the only dignity left in the theater of defeat. The Senate chamber roared with satisfaction, but far away, across the gulfs of space, another chamber was silent. Deep beneath the crust of Earth, far from the Council's jeweled amphitheaters, a chamber breathed with machines. The walls were close, ribbed with iron struts and conduits that pulsed with dim light. The air hummed with recycled oxygen and the faint metallic taste of old circuits. Tactical displays were frozen mid-update. Starscapes paused as if the universe itself had been stunned. Stacked monitors lined the room with streams of numbers and maps, the fragments of a greater design waiting to be awakened. Lucas Sloan sat at the heart of it. His chair, bolted into the steel plating, creaked as he leaned forward, eyes fixed on the battered console that now projected the galactic broadcast, Forbidden, restricted, precaution. Sloane's hands, marked by old burns and calluses, gripped the armrests. A faint tremor ran through his fingers. His face, lined by years of command and shadows of battles never spoken, was unreadable save for the tightening of his jaw. His breath came slow, controlled, but in his chest, anger pressed against the ribs like a caged animal. Yet even the fury could not eclipse the heaviness that lay beneath. Resignation, bitter and cold, the knowledge that Earth's fate had been sealed before the decree was even uttered. No voices rose around him, no applause, no protests, only the low hum of machines and the subtle hiss of air circulation. The silence was more suffocating than any outcry could have been. He exhaled once, long and measured, then turned to the console at his side. A small panel waited under a protective cover, its surface scratched by years of use. For a moment his hand hovered above it, fingers trembling, before he flipped the guard back with a sharp, decisive snap. Beneath lay a keypad of dull metal etched with cryptic identifiers. His throat tightened, but his voice, when it emerged, was steady, stripped of ornament. Authorization Sloane, Protocol Colossus, execute. The chamber answered. A tone, low and resonant, rolled through the steel bones of the base. Warning lights snapped to life, bathing the narrow room in crimson. Across the tactical monitors, dormant maps flared awake, new vectors streaking across the stars in lines of fire, routes long hidden but never forgotten. The base shuddered as if the Earth itself rejected what had been unleashed. Then the air bent. The edges of the room folded inward, collapsing light and matter in a single breath. Lucas Sloane and the men who had sworn themselves to him dissolved into displacement, torn from the soil of Earth by engines forbidden by the very decree just pronounced. When reality reassembled, the first sight was the endless storm of Jupiter filling the viewport. Bands of red and ochre writhed in eternal conflict, lightning dancing in the shadows of its great red spot. The planet loomed vast, immeasurable, as though it alone bore witness to humanity's defiance. Around Sloane, his crew materialized, bodies steadying after the wrenching transition. Commander Daniel Kimura, built like a bastion of stone, exhaled harshly and set his massive hands to the glowing runes of control panels, already assessing stability. Chief Engineer Barry Stoyanov muttered half-formed calculations, his eyes darting feverishly across diagnostic streams as though the numbers might betray some hidden failure. Others, men whose names had not yet been written into history, but who would bear its weight, tightened straps, checked weapons, and exchanged wordless glances of grim resolve. Sloane did not look at them at first. His eyes remained fixed on the raging storms of Jupiter, his reflection caught faintly against the glass of the viewport. His expression was carved in stone, lips pressed together, gaze locked not on the world outside, but on the vast humiliation that had just been broadcast across the galaxy. Humanity's disgrace had been made public. Their chains had been celebrated. And yet, in this silence beyond Earth, in the shadow of Jupiter's storms, something stirred. Protocol Colossus was more than defiance. It was the first move in a game the Council had never anticipated. A game born of human ingenuity, sharpened by desperation, and sealed in secrecy beneath the crust of their own world. The decree had sentenced them. But here, in this chamber of steel orbiting a giant of storms, Lucas Sloane had already chosen humanity's reply. The turbulence that had torn through the council chamber seemed to echo across the solar system itself. In the silence that followed the heated proclamations on Earth, far beyond the reach of human eyes, Jupiter stirred in a way that defied its nature. At first, it was nothing more than a shift in the hues of its endless storms. The great red spot, ancient and unyielding, seemed to slow its rotation. The bands of ochre, rust, and ivory shivered, as if something immense pressed from within. The gas giant's clouds, denser than oceans, older than empires, began to part in ways that were not natural. Curtains of atmosphere tore back in symmetrical spirals, unveiling a geometry hidden beneath chaos. Nearby, alien probes, Skeletal machines of obsidian alloys, built by the Tharkesh for surveillance, wavered in orbit. Their frames flickered, lenses fracturing as gravity warped in pulses. One probe elongated grotesquely, stretched thin before imploding silently into dust. Another's systems froze mid-transmission, its last broadcast a smear of static as its circuits bled out. The rest scattered, powerless to withstand what was awakening below. From the abyssal storms, the behemoth rose. Its form was not of ship or fortress, but something between architecture and living titan. Vast ribs of blackened metal curled outward, each one lined with fissures glowing faintly with deep sapphire light. The gravitational field around it buckled space itself, bending starlight, warping trajectories of nearby debris. Jupiter's atmosphere clung to its surface like a shroud before peeling away, as though even the planet itself recoiled. Within, lights bled into corridors that had lain dormant for decades. The behemoth's heart began to thrum. First came the ignition of its shields, arcs of invisible force shimmering against the vacuum, their resonance like the toll of cathedral bells. Then the armaments, rail cannons aligning along the exterior, plates of armor locking into place with the sound of mountains grinding. Deep within, the tactical core pulsed, a crystalline construct radiating orders to every system, every circuit, as though memory itself had awoken. The bridge reassembled itself like a puzzle in motion. Floors unfolded into transparent planes, exposing the distortion of Jupiter's gravity beneath. Walls rotated, their angles never aligning in comfort, forcing human eyes to perceive perspectives that seemed impossible. Every surface hummed with low vibrations, alive, as if the behemoth itself were breathing. Commander Lucas Sloan stepped onto the bridge. He was a tall figure, shoulders squared in a dark uniform, marked only by the insignia of the hidden program. His jaw was locked in the way of men who carried both burden and conviction. Behind him, Lieutenant Aaron Kessler, tactical officer, moved stiffly, one hand hovering over the controls as though afraid to touch them. To Sloan's left, Chief Engineer Kevin Silva muttered under his breath, a mix of awe and dread, his scarred hands twitching as if already mapping out the colossal systems in his mind. And at the far console, Dr. Rowan Erdos, the scientist soldier, stood motionless, his eyes reflecting the light from the awakening core, like a man staring at divinity. "Systems are responding," Silva said, his voice breaking. "This shouldn't be possible. After all this time." "It was never dead," Erdos murmured, reverent. "It was only waiting." Kessler's lips tightened. Waiting for what? Or for whom? The sequence continued, the soundscape of a giant stirring. Each reactivation came with a resonant thud, deep enough to vibrate bones. The crew exchanged glances, not of routine discipline, but of men confronting something beyond comprehension. The behemoth was theirs, human-built, human-forged in secret, but standing inside it was like standing inside the ribcage of a god. Sloan advanced to the center of the bridge. His boots rang against the transparent floor, each step suspended above the bending horizon of Jupiter. He looked at his men, his reduced crew, his only confidants in the most dangerous secret humanity had ever kept, and then at the panorama before them. Jupiter receded as the behemoth's engines pushed against the impossible mass, dragging it free of the storms. The planet rotated strangely in the viewport, as though gravity itself had inverted. For a moment, the entire crew saw Jupiter upside down, a vast crown of storms hanging inverted in space. It was not a malfunction. It was perspective, the behemoth imposing its own axis upon reality. "The Council has chosen to strike against us," Sloan said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "They've sanctioned Earth. They mean to bring war to our world." The men absorbed the words in silence, each processing through their own lens. Kessler's jaw hardened, soldier's loyalty igniting in his eyes. Silva shook his head slowly, torn between fear and pride that his hands had helped build this monstrous answer. Erdos only stared at the inverted Jupiter, whispering something that might have been a prayer or a curse. Sloan turned from them and fixed his gaze on the void ahead. "We will not allow it." The behemoth systems answered him as though in allegiance. Another deep chord shuddered through the bridge, a pulse of light rippling across the walls. The crew steadied themselves against the uneasy ground, glass beneath their boots, angles skewed all around. No one spoke. No one dared. Outside, the last veil of Jupiter's clouds fell away, and the behemoth emerged in its full magnitude, an omen against the void, a shadow across the stars. And as the alien probe's remains drifted into nothingness, the titanic construct set its sights beyond Jupiter, toward Earth, toward destiny. The turbulence of Jove's clouds still lingered in the crew's vision when new tremors rippled through the void. Sensors, alien and human alike, caught the anomalies in distorted pulses. Gravity bending in irregular patterns, light stuttering in waves around the orbit of the gas giant. What had slumbered was now undeniable. Behemoth had stirred, and the Council was watching. In the austere halls of the Galactic Senate, echoing chambers carved from living stone and crystalline spires, voices clashed. Generals and envoys, their forms refracted by the shimmering light of the central dome, argued over the meaning of the readings. Some scoffed. Primitive humans, clumsy species of fire and iron, incapable of such orchestration. Others, like Admiral Vaith of the Kalthar, whose scaled visage shimmered with silver iridescence, warned restraint. His vertical pupils fixed on the patterns projected mid-air, gravitational disruptions with a cadence too precise to be natural. This is no storm. They have hidden a construct, and they hid it beneath your very eyes. The murmurs rose, accusations sharpened, then came the declaration, calm, ceremonial, inevitable. By authority of this Senate, intervention is sanctioned. Tactical containment, under the veil of prevention. Let it be written. The decree sealed, there would be no hesitation. The veredictum was mobilized. When the vessel emerged from the warp fold, it dominated the void. Forged in the foundries of Makora Prime, the veredictum carried the grandeur of ceremony in its silhouette. Its hull was layered with obsidian armor traced by rivers of gold luminescence, each line a scripture of conquest. Spires of sensor arrays jutted outward like a crown of thorns, while its main body resembled a cathedral in motion. Arches of living alloy, armored hangars curving into formation. Beneath that solemn majesty rested its true core. Mass drivers capable of cracking moons, gravitational snares to choke engines mid-flight, and a blockade arsenal that could silence entire fleets. At its helm stood Commander Keldron Myrn, a towering figure of the Valak, his skin hardened like stone, his tusked jaw set into an expression of ruthless purpose. His arrival meant the Council had chosen its executioner. Inside the behemoth, shadows danced as dormant circuits stirred under command. Sloan stood at the heart of the bridge, staring into the storm-lit void. He had already seen the faint flicker of approaching signatures. He knew what followed the decree. And yet, hesitation gripped him, not in fear, but in recognition of inevitability. His fingers hovered above the console, tracing invisible patterns across the tactical holomap. Then he issued the command. Release the false trails. The engineer, Miller, a wiry man with sharp eyes and oil-stained hands, frowned but obeyed. Old trade routes blossomed across the map, flaring like dying stars. Decades of abandoned human corridors, paths through asteroid fields, forgotten fuel depots, relic stations in void sectors, suddenly came alive. Ghost fleets, artificial signatures crafted by Behemoth's intelligence, drifted across sensors. To Council satellites, it appeared as if human flotillas scattered like vermin in all directions. Sloan's deception was elegant, buying minutes, perhaps hours. He knew it would not last longer. On the bridge, the crew reacted each in their way. Lieutenant Arkin, tactical officer, clenched his jaw as though bracing for impact, muttering that war had been etched into stone long before today. Scientist Veyers, pale and contemplative, whispered to no one in particular that history would mark this hour as mankind's true unveiling. Even Müller, skeptical, ran his hand along the trembling rail of the console, torn between awe and dread. Around them, the bridge shifted subtly, walls folding at impossible angles, the floor of transparent panels showing streams of gravity bending below. The ship was alive, and its pulse echoed through their bones. Sloan did not address his men immediately. He turned instead to the ship itself. The bridge lights dimmed, and in their place rose a projection of the behemoth's mind, an interface of fractal geometries that glowed with deep, shifting amber. His voice softened, though the crew could hear every word. "This was never meant to be, you know that," he said to the living vessel. "We built you as the blade we hoped never to unsheathe. Plan B, an answer only if the questions grew too loud to silence. And now, here we are." The amber fractals pulsed in rhythm, as though acknowledging his confession. Sloane's gaze lingered on the patterns before he returned to his men. "Do not mistake this for glory," he said, his tone ironclad. "What we do is necessary, not noble. The Council calls it containment. We know it for what it is, punishment, and we will not kneel." Far beyond, in the dark arc of Io's orbit, the void tore again. Space warped as vessels arrived, hundreds upon hundreds, each bearing the banners of a species once united in suspicion, now united in force. The Veredictum led them like a spearhead, its golden veins gleaming against the black. Behind it followed carriers broad as continents, frigates bristling with turrets, dreadnoughts with armored spines casting shadows across the moon's fractured surface. 218 ships of war aligned, encircling Io in a silent, crushing grip. The order was delivered without hesitation, without negotiation. Blockade perimeter, no passage, no exceptions. The siege had begun. The blockade settled like a tightening noose. From the observation bridge of the Behemoth, Sloan watched as the 3 concentric rings of alien warships slid into place, their overlapping shield matrices shimmering faintly against the void. The Veredictum loomed at the heart of the encirclement, a colossus of bone-white alloys, its hull etched with ceremonial glyphs that glowed like embers across its curved frame. Smaller vessels, frigates shaped like angular shards, destroyers trailing long antennae like the feelers of some abyssal predator, anchored the perimeter, their weapon arrays aligned in perfect geometric symmetry. Nothing could move through that formation unseen. Nothing could escape. Inside the Behemoth, silence stretched dangerously thin. Officers shifted in their seats, consoles flickering pale blue across strained faces. Lieutenant Marlowe wiped his palms against his uniform, smearing a sheen of sweat as he pretended to study sensor readings that had not changed in minutes. Ensign Carter clutched his headset against his ear, though no sound came. His eyes darted toward Sloan, then back to the dead channels. "This is it." Sloan stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, but his eyes distant. The weight pressed in on him, the impossible immensity of the ship beneath his command, the thousands of lives inside its armored hull, and the billions beyond, who had never even heard its name. He could feel every breath in the room, every expectation heavy in the silence. Yet his own breath felt fractured, uneven, as though the ship itself resisted the order he hadn't given. One of the Council's cruisers broke formation. Its elongated prow, gleaming like molten glass, advanced with deliberate arrogance. The voice that filled the Behemoth's comms was layered, resonant, carrying the gravitas of a civilization that had ruled countless stars. "This is High Admiral Tharek of the Serin Ascendancy, speaking under authority of the Galactic Council. Vessel identified as human construction, you are ordered to deactivate engines and prepare for boarding. Failure to comply will be considered hostile action. Respond immediately." The words hung there, slicing through the air of the command deck. No one moved. Sloan didn't even twitch, his eyes fixed on the alien vessel approaching like a blade sliding toward flesh. Carter's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of his console. Ruiz swallowed, loud in the silence. "Say something." But Sloane's voice, when it finally came, was quiet, flat, almost fragile. "Nothing in, nothing out." The words hit like a hammer. The crew froze, then shifted, eyes widening, backs stiffening, a murmur running through the bridge like a ripple in still water. No further orders came, only silence, and then light. The spear of Io fired without warning. The void cracked open in a column of incandescent brilliance, lancing outward faster than sensors could register. 28 ships, cruisers, frigates, gunboats, shattered in the first breath of the strike, their hulls unraveling into fragments before alarms could even sound. The Behemoth's deck quaked under the force, vibrations resonating through the steel bones of the giant. On the bridge, Ruiz recoiled, turning his back as though the sight itself could blind him. "Never thought I'd see something like this." Marlowe simply stood frozen, his headset dangling uselessly from one hand, eyes wide as the debris fields blossomed across the starry black. Panic rippled through the alien fleet. Defensive grids faltered, systems glitched mid-sequence, and entire squadrons lurched without cohesion. The Veredictum's escorts fired blind, volleys scattering into empty void, missing targets that had already moved, or never existed at all. Warnings echoed across their comms. Shield failures, sensor blindness, formation collapse. Then the second weapon woke. The Chronos axis stirred like a slumbering giant, and time itself bent. On the alien monitors, readings fractured, seconds stretched, then folded back on themselves. Ships appeared in two places at once, their silhouettes stuttering across displays. Targeting locks flickered into nonsense. A frigate turned its weapons on empty space, firing at phantoms that existed only milliseconds earlier. Another ship's engines cut off entirely, unable to reconcile the moment in which they should have ignited. Inside the Veredictum, Executor Keldrin Myrn stood rigid, claws gripping the edge of his command platform. His elongated frame, wrapped in layered armor that gleamed like obsidian, trembled not from fear but from disbelief. His four eyes darted across the chaos unfolding on the holosphere before him, red markers blinking out by the dozen, sensor feeds dissolving into a haze of static and distortion. Officers shouted in different tongues, some demanding retaliatory volleys, others screaming for diagnostic reports, others still pleading for orders that would not come. "Focus shields to Sector 9, roared Captain Duroc, a hulking reptilian whose scaled brow glistened under stress. "They're hitting us with unseen munitions." "No," Myrn cut him off, his voice quieter than the din but far sharper. His gaze was fixed on the impossible curvature of light, the strange rippling scars that now traced the void where human fire had struck. It was not simple destruction. It was manipulation. The collapse of their warships was not the hand of brute force. It was precision, tearing open reality itself. Another blast carved through, splitting a formation of 6 destroyers before their shielding arrays had even registered impact. Myrn's throat tightened, his jaw flexing as he exhaled words like a curse. "It seems a spatial temporal distortion. They are striking us through. Breaches in space-time." The final salvo lit the void, tearing a swath clean across the blockade's innermost ring. The glow of ruptured engines and dying hulls spread like silent fireworks, reflected in the Veredictum's polished armor. On the Behemoth, the bridge quivered under the fading hum of discharged power, leaving only stunned silence among the human crew. The void itself seemed to recoil, scarred by weapons that should not exist, and the blockade, once seamless, impenetrable, hung fractured, a ring of fire drifting over the shadow of Io. The Behemoth remained silent after the devastating volley of the Spear of Io, its vast silhouette cutting across the stars like a dark leviathan. Debris still drifted where fleets of the Council had once stood in disciplined formation, now reduced to tumbling wreckage. Inside the command deck, the crew did not cheer, nor did they exhale relief. They sat in strained silence, hands trembling, consoles blinking, each man haunted by what had just been unleashed. "Prepare the photon quark net," Sloane said finally, his voice low but firm. He leaned forward over the tactical projection, his brow heavy with hesitation. His lips parted again as if to delay the command, but the data was already undeniable. The survivors of the council were regrouping. If he allowed them a moment longer, the behemoth would be surrounded anew. He closed his eyes for one heartbeat. "Deploy it, now." 1,000 microdrones burst from the behemoth's hidden bays, smaller than dust motes against the glare of Io's burning skies. On the tactical screen, they appeared as a shifting net of spectral light, pale strands weaving through the void. To the naked eye, they looked almost ghostly, flickers of glimmering haze slipping past armor plates and shield barriers as though they were no more than mist. God above, they're phasing right through the hulls. The drones penetrated one cruiser, then another. For seconds, nothing happened, only eerie silence across the comms. Then came the implosions. Centers of command collapsed inward as if space itself had swallowed them whole. Screens flared with distorted visuals. Alien officers screaming in fractured time, their voices shredded into echoes before the feed cut out. Vessels convulsed, their cores folding into themselves until only fragments spun outward. A young operator, Ensign Law, turned away from his station, face pale as parchment. "I never thought I'd live to see something like this," he muttered, almost to himself. Sloane's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Each implosion reverberated like a hammer against his chest. These weren't victories. They were condemnations, the product of politics that had left no other path but slaughter. He kept his gaze fixed on the tactical map, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the command rail. On the bridge of the Veredictum, Executor Keldrin Myrn staggered back to his feet, one horned ridge above his brow slick with dark violet blood from a ruptured support beam. His reptilian features, usually stern with authority, were contorted with fury and disbelief. Around him, his alien crew, a mix of broad-shouldered Drosk with plated hides and wiry insectoid Saith navigators, scrambled in chaos. "Do not falter," Myrn roared, his voice tearing through the confusion. He slammed his clawed hand on the command dais, talons scratching sparks across its surface. "All ships, attack the behemoth directly. Ram it if you must. I want its carcass shattered even if it costs us every life." His officers froze for a fraction of a second at the order, but Myrn's glare cut deeper than fear of death. Across the field, vessels adjusted course, engines overloading, trajectories arcing toward the behemoth in suicidal vectors. "Brace!" shouted Commander Valen aboard the behemoth, eyes widening as he saw the wave of ships accelerating. "They're coming in full force!" Sloane didn't respond immediately. His lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze shifting between tactical markers and the trembling crew. He finally drew a slow breath, then spoke. "Activate the vibrational blade shield." The behemoth shimmered as its defensive field ignited. A thin edge of oscillating energy radiated outward, invisible to sensors, but visible to the eye. A rippling distortion like heat haze, surrounding the Colossus in a veil of vibrating resonance. The first of the suicidal vessels struck. It didn't explode. It simply split apart, sheared in two as if carved by a surgeon's scalpel. Hull fragments spun away silently, followed by crew pods and broken weapons platforms. Another crashed forward, then another, each one cleaved apart, their desperate charge undone in seconds. To the Council fleet, the behemoth seemed less a ship than a floating executioner, a wall of invisible knives. Multiple collisions neutralized, more incoming. But already the charge was breaking. Signals fractured across the Council channels. Discipline wavered. And then, almost unexpectedly, Lieutenant Martell straightened from his console, eyes fixed on a flashing beacon. "Commander," he said, "Sloane, we're detecting escape pods. Multiple. Breaking formation. Vector suggests retreat." The crew turned toward Sloane. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the hum of consoles and the distant rumble of the shield's vibrating resonance. One pod in particular drifted past the chaos of the battlefield, ejecting from the wreck of a Council cruiser. Its engines were faint, its trajectory weak, but it was escaping, away from Io, away from the slaughter. Commander Valen's voice was cold but edged with hesitation. "Orders? Do we intercept?" Every eye on the deck turned to Sloan. He didn't speak. He didn't even lift his chin. He only looked at the projection, then at the crew, his eyes shadowed by the weight of everything already done. Slowly, deliberately, he shook his head. The pods continued on their path, untouched, slipping into the darkness of space. A hush spread across the deck. The behemoth stood undefeated, the council broken, but there was no triumph here, only the echo of lives lost and the unbearable silence of survival. Wreckage still burned in silence around Ganymede's orbit, the scattered corpses of ships drifting like broken teeth torn from a jaw. The void was littered with molten fragments, shredded wings, and husks of engines that no longer hummed. The last echoes of the Council fleet's demise vibrated across the behemoth's hull, a low metallic groan as the Colossus adjusted its mass against the emptiness. On the tactical screen, the counter was merciless. 183 vessels annihilated in 12 minutes. It looked like victory. It smelled like finality. And yet, silence never meant safety. The alert came sharp, piercing through the bridge in a shriek of crimson light. Tactical Officer Garen Reese bent over his console, his elongated fingers moving fast as data cascaded across the screen. Unregistered anomaly approaching on a curved vector. Autonomous trajectory. Speed constant. Signature fragmented. His voice was controlled, but his tendrils of sweat betrayed something more human. Fear. Sloan stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. The display revealed the thing's shape. A compact spindle, no more than 30 meters long, hurtling with intent through debris. It had no escort, no transponder, no heat emissions beyond bare propulsion. A blind dart in the dark. "Magnify," he ordered. The hollow expanded, revealing the silhouette. Armored plates fused crudely, sharp ridges masking inner machinery. Then the signature shifted. Subsurface detonation cores, hidden warheads laced with quark destabilizers. Garen froze for half a second. "That is not a probe. It's a sabotage module. Pre-programmed, launched before Veredictum's core collapse." The blood drained from Sloan's face. Ganymede. The module's trajectory was locked directly toward the moon's infrastructure grid. If it detonated in atmosphere, the civilian stations below would fracture into ruin. To fire directly would ignite the warhead early, still enough to burn through the settlements. The options were death one way or another. He inhaled deeply. Lateral disruption. Gravitational shear, not direct fire. His tone was firm, but his knuckles whitened around the armrest of his command chair. "We shifted off course without igniting the core." Garen turned sharply. "Admiral, probability of structural deflection success, 18%. That maneuver could destabilize our entire orbit." Sloan did not blink. "Do it. Prepare the behemoth's disruptor grid. Prime frequency 7, oscillation 90. The ship groaned as systems recalibrated. Engineers barked readings, consoles flickered. Behind them, Chief Engineer Helena Chandra moved to confirm magnetic couplings. Her brow was tight with determination as she keyed a final override. The countdown blared. 3, 2, 1. The behemoth released a pulse. It wasn't a beam. It was a distortion, an invisible spear that twisted the very airless space. Stars behind the pulse shimmered, warped like reflections in broken glass. The sabotage module began to shudder, its vector dragged sideways, as if an unseen hand had ripped at its spine. Metal groaned in protest, its warhead tearing at its own casing. The thing bent, screamed in frequencies unheard, and then spiraled violently away, missing Ganymede by thousands of kilometers, tumbling into a graveyard of silent wrecks. But victory brought chaos. The gravitational recoil slammed the behemoth off axis. The floor tilted. Men shouted, weightless for a heartbeat, before the stabilizers screamed alive. Sparks erupted. Helena Chandra staggered, clutching a railing too late. Her skull cracked hard against the edge of her console. Blood streaked her temple as she collapsed, unconscious, while her station sparked in showers of white fire. Two crewmen rushed to her aid, dragging her limp form away from the smoking controls. "Stabilizers failing," cried Lieutenant Corvin Marin. His hand slipped across the controls, fighting the spin. The behemoth's mass shifted, rotating like a wounded beast, dragging its titanic weight through the orbital debris. And then came the retaliation. A single fleeing corvette from the shattered Council fleet, cornered and desperate, spat its final breath. A quantum lance burst from its bow, cutting across the void like a line of sunfire. It struck the behemoth's flank with unrelenting precision. The world erupted. The bridge shuddered as metal screamed. Blindage peeled like fruit skin, torn open in jagged scars. A wave of molten shards burst inward, searing air into smoke and fire. The impact threw men from their stations. One officer was ripped from his harness, flung into a bulkhead with bone-snapping force. Sparks showered the bridge as the behemoth's wall blistered, glowing with residual plasma. Support beams cracked, sending spiderweb fissures along the ceiling. For a moment it felt as though the Colossus itself might collapse. Sloan braced, chest heaving against the pressure. He stood firm while others struggled to rise. The behemoth moaned like a wounded titan, but it did not fall. Against the immensity of its hull, the quantum strike was no more than a nail in flesh, painful, bloody, but never fatal. Panels dimmed, but systems roared back. The monster was not broken. "Damage report!" Sloan barked. Corvin's voice was ragged, smoke choking his lungs. "Structural integrity. Compromised in Sector 12. 37 casualties. Dozens wounded. Primary shield array destabilized, but we remain combat operational." Across the bridge, screens flashed with one final reading. Tactical logs lit up with a singular distortion ripple, a lone signature bending space-time in retreat. One ship, one jump. The mark was unmistakable. Keldrin Myrn, Garen whispered, bitterness curdling the name. Sloan did not answer. His gaze lingered on the empty void beyond the wound in the hull. His jaw tightened, his knuckles closed into a fist so firm that the leather of his gloves creaked. He said nothing, only clenched silence, a wordless vow forged in fire and loss. The behemoth burned, but it stood. The battle was theirs, yet the war had not ended. Somewhere, in the shadows between stars, Myrn lived. And so Sloan's silence was not relief. It was promise. The bridge was still trembling from the last impact when Sloan stepped forward, smoke curling from shattered conduits and sparks dripping like fireflies from ruptured panels. The air was thick with blood, ozone, and burnt alloy, every breath a reminder of the chaos they had survived. Bodies were being carried aside, moans and hurried footsteps echoing beneath the low hum of failing systems. The behemoth's voice, calm and precise, resonated through the fractured silence. Confirmed. 218 enemy vessels destroyed or disabled. 3 civilians gravely wounded in lunar rear quarters. 17 human soldiers critically injured. 4 confirmed fatalities. 1 warp signature verified. Veredictum. Executor Keldrin Myrn has escaped. The words seemed to sink deeper into the room than the haze of smoke, pressing down on every man and woman standing upright. Sloan clenched his fist once more, silently, before moving toward the central walkway. That was when a young officer stepped forward, his uniform torn, darkened with blood not entirely his own. His face was pale, streaked with grime, and his hands trembled though his voice cracked sharp. "You hesitated, Commander," the lieutenant said, eyes wide with an anger born of fear. "You almost got us all killed." The bridge stilled. Those who heard froze in their stations, their eyes flicking between the exhausted commander and the trembling youth. The sound of a dripping conduit was louder than the hush. Sloan turned slowly, meeting the lieutenant's stare without blinking. His face bore soot, his jaw tight, but his voice carried the weight of tempered steel. "I counted every second," he said. "Every second mattered. If I'd acted without precision, we'd have lost hundreds more. I carry each death with me, Lieutenant. Each one. You think I don't feel it? You think I don't see their faces when I close my eyes?" The young man faltered, his chest rising fast. The bloodstains on his tunic looked darker under the dim lights. He swallowed, eyes dropping for an instant, before he dared another glance at Sloane. This time, it wasn't defiance. It was something heavier, quieter. Understanding, respect, reluctantly born. He shifted his weight back, his jaw tight as he looked away, ashamed of his outburst, but marked by it. Around them, others who had heard turned back to their work with unsteady movements, their gazes lowered. The commander's words had settled the air, not by removing the grief, but by sharing it, exposing its weight. Sloane stood amidst the wounded and the scorched consoles for a moment longer, feeling the ache in his bones. He took one slow breath, then moved with deliberate steps toward the central terminal. Its surface was cracked, one side scorched black, but the communication core still pulsed faintly beneath the damage. He placed his hand on the panel, and the fractured screen flickered to life, dragging static across broken glass before stabilizing into a transmission. The face of Varys Dahlar filled the haze of the bridge. His features were sharp, pale blue skin gleaming faintly under ceremonial adornments, ornamented crests of silver and obsidian set across his collar and brow like a crown of restraint. His eyes, deep-set and narrow, fixed on Sloane with the stillness of a blade resting against flesh. "Commander," Dahlar said, his voice smooth but cold, each syllable weighed as though carrying centuries of law. He did not ask. He waited. The silence itself demanded explanation. Sloane leaned forward, smoke curling past his shoulders, his voice unwavering, sharpened by the battlefield still raging in his blood. "We demand respect. You closed your doors to us. Shut us from the tables of your councils. We will not cut ourselves off from the galaxy because you decree it. We have fought for our place among the stars, and no one will strip that from us." The words struck the channel like an iron hammer. For a heartbeat, silence followed. The image of the Primarch unblinking, the weight of his gaze unyielding. Then Varys Dahlar shifted forward, shoulders tilting as his chin lowered, his mouth opening with intent. His eyes narrowed further, a flash of fury breaking through the veneer of composure. The muscles of his jaw tensed, a faint curl of his fingers suggesting a gesture that never reached completion. But before sound could leave his lips, Sloane cut the line. The screen went black, leaving only fractured sparks and the low hum of damaged systems. The silence that followed was deeper than any explosion. It filled the bridge, broken only by the faint groans of the wounded and the crackle of burnt wires. Sloane remained standing at the console, his reflection faint on the darkened glass. The taste of ash lingered at the back of his throat, but his words still hung in the air, unshaken. He did not look back at his crew. He did not need to. The message had already been sent, to the galaxy, to the council, to his own men and women. They had carved their place in the stars, and nothing, not the fury of an empire nor the shadow of Myrn, would take it away. The last sparks of Sloane's interrupted transmission still lingered in the air, the image of Varys Dahlar's furious yet controlled face fading into static. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hiss of ruptured conduits and the strained groan of twisted bulkheads. The behemoth loomed beside Jupiter, wounded yet unbroken, its hull scarred, but its core steady. Slowly, its vast systems began shutting down. One by one, the offensive batteries along its flanks dimmed. Turrets that had burned through armadas lowered their barrels, locking into stillness. The great gravitational drive at its heart pulsed once, then drained its power, releasing the invisible grip it held on the void. The oscillation rippled outward, bending sensors of the monitoring frigates stationed on the edge of the battlefield. Alarms flared aboard those smaller alien ships as gravitational readings spiked chaotically. Captains, fearing collapse or implosion, pulled their vessels into retreat formations, their hulls shuddering under stress until the anomaly settled. Even at a distance, the behemoth's presence forced fear and repositioning. Inside, Commander Lucas Sloan walked with measured steps through the smoldering wreckage of his bridge. Panels hung shattered, holograms flickered half-formed, smoke wreathed the air in long black ribbons. His boots crunched over shattered glass and blood-soaked rags. He stopped at a section of broken wall, where once polished metal had torn away, opening a jagged viewport to the void. Through it, Jupiter turned slowly, immense and calm, its swirling storms illuminated by the dim light of Sul. Humanity's throne now sat in the shadow of that colossus. He stood there, staring, unblinking. "Commander!" The voice was faint, rough with pain. A young crewman, Ensign Callan Rice, leaned against a scorched bulkhead, his right arm bound hastily with synth bandages, crimson still seeping through. His uniform was stained dark, his face pale and wet with sweat. He limped closer, trying to straighten his back despite the agony. "Commander, we won, right?" Sloan did not look at him. His gaze stayed on the gas giant, on the storms that moved endlessly across its bands, eternal and uncaring. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, deliberate, edged with the exhaustion of command. "Victory is when everyone goes home," he said. This was only to make sure they never knock on our door again." Rise lowered his eyes. For a moment he tried to muster a reply, but none came. The truth in Sloane's words pressed heavier than his wounds. He gave a small pained nod and withdrew into the smoke. Sloane stayed. Alone now, surrounded by the gutted remains of his command, he reached the central console that still sparked with fractured light. He leaned over the cracked surface and entered a code by memory, fingers steady despite the tremor that ran through his body. A line of encrypted symbols scrolled rapidly across the fractured display before resolving into confirmation. "Code Heimdall," Sloane said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Monitor the stars. Be ready if they return." The command pulsed once, then transmitted, vanishing through secure relays until it reached the hidden server buried beneath lunar regolith. The message vanished into silence. Far from the behemoth, echoes of its battle reached alien worlds. On Selvek Sixk, beneath the crystalline dome of the Prime Chamber, Prime Minister Zerak Dek rose from his obsidian chair. His tall insectoid frame shivered, though not from weakness. His wide, multifaceted eyes reflected the image on the towering screen before him. The monstrous human warship, scarred but alive, standing firm beside Jupiter. His mandibles trembled once, and his right hand, three-jointed, veined with dark chitin, quivered openly. He did not disguise it. His aides, frozen in the chamber, watched their leader's trembling hand and understood the weight of what he felt: awe, dread, and the inevitability of change. In the bustling trade station of Zavar, its corridors lined with banners of a dozen species, a meeting between two naval almirants ended in silence. Admiral Threk, broad and scaled with gold reptilian skin, glanced at his human counterpart across the projection table. The image of Sloane, standing resolute before Jupiter, played on the wall behind them. Neither spoke. With a simple gesture, Threk shut down the display. His fellow admiral, Calith, bowed his horned head, eyes narrowing in contemplation. Without a word, the two collected their data pads and departed, already recalculating star routes, already imagining a galaxy where trade and defense strategies must be rewritten in light of this revelation. On Ziril, within the vaulted diplomatic spire where walls glowed with bioluminescent patterns, silence dominated the council chamber. At last, Councillor Erin Vayner, her tall, crystalline form glimmering faintly, spoke into the hush. Her voice carried no drama, only disbelieving logic. They built it. Inside a planet. Across from her, Counselor Marvac Drool, a grizzled strategist with bark-like skin, leaned forward. His deep-set eyes reflected fragments of the recording. "That is not simply technology," he said, his voice slow, measured. "It is insanity. Or..." His gaze lingered, the corners of his mouth curling not with a smile, but with the recognition of dangerous brilliance. Genius. Elsewhere, in a dim military command deck orbiting the colonies of the Zhurn, a commander stood alone at his station. His breathing was ragged, his claws twitching against the control panel. Protocols glared on the screen before him, automatic directives to escalate defensive measures against Earth. His orders were clear, sanctioned by the Council. Yet his hands hesitated. He stared at the recording of the behemoth one last time, and instinct overrode duty. With a sharp gesture, he disabled the offensive protocols. The warning lights blinked once, then faded, leaving silence. No one had told him to stand down. He had done it because survival demanded it. In every hole, on every world, a single truth spread like wildfire. Humanity could not be caged. They had stepped into the galaxy with something uncontainable, and they were here to remain. Back aboard the behemoth, Sloane leaned his palms against the fractured console. His eyes lingered on the jagged hole that looked out over Jupiter. The storms raged on, a reminder that nothing in the galaxy was ever truly calm. He activated the intercom, letting his voice reach every battered corner of the ship, every crew member who still clung to their duties. "This is what remains. This is what we carry. When we close our eyes, when we open them again." No cheer followed, no applause, only silence, and the sound of distant welding, the coughs of wounded crew, the groan of a ship that had endured too much. Beyond, in the cold black orbit, the Council's hidden surveillance probes kept their vigil. Their lenses recorded every second, every scar, every word that had passed through the behemoth's halls. The transmission continued, unbroken, feeding into the Council's archives. It would be dissected, broadcast, whispered across empires. There was no longer any way to conceal what had been done. "Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. Hope you had a great time with the story. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really makes a huge difference to the channel. And hey, I've got something else for you. I've chosen another story that I think you'll really enjoy. Just click the card right here, or hit this one to jump into the full playlist. See you in the next one.